First of all, Don, CMS, thank you so much for organizing this. It's just been overwhelming, to be honest. And thank you to all of you for your incredibly warm thoughts and memories of Juan. He looked at everyone in this room, not just as a valued colleague, but also as dear friend. And we always remarked how lucky we were, and I continue to be a member of the immigrant rights community, and how everybody has each other's back. So incredible and unique. So now I'm going to switch and try to lighten it up a little bit and share some memories that only a wife can share. And I know he's up there right now going, oh, here she goes. And most of these are immigration related, but one I want to start with is Juan's own history as an immigrant. This is a serious remembrance. People spoke today about him being a bridge, a healer. He was the bridge for his family to the United States. They immigrated here after his father finished his medical degree, went on for his master's in public health at Berkeley, and then remained in the United States to join the World Health Organization. Juan was 7 at the time. His 2 siblings, who are also no longer with us, were both younger. But Juan was that classic older son who bridged the American culture to his parents' Colombian culture and literally interpreted this country for his family. I think that's a uniquely immigrant thing to do. Now for the fun stuff. Juan and I met in law school at AU. And I remember we were in the same section. You remember, those of you who've gone to law school, they know it's like kindergarten. They put you in large groups and you stay with each other all day long. And the first day, we went around the room and gave our names. And we got to Juan, and he said Juan Osuna. And I had just moved back from Japan. Osuna is also a last name in Japanese. And I was looking at him the whole year going, you are the strangest looking Japanese man I have ever seen. And what's this Juan thing? Anyway, a mutual friend in law school, I think, realized that we would be good together and connected us. And we started dating our second year. Well, our second year also happened to be the year that we took immigration law together. I went to law school wanting to do human rights work. Juan went to law school because he couldn't figure out what else to do with his life. Somehow we both ended up in immigration law. And he sat next to me. Sam Bernson, who was the general counsel of the INS, was our professor. We started every class with Sam saying, how many undocumented people are there in the United States? And we all had to shout, nobody knows. And this was right around the time of passage of IRCA, the first legalization program. So Juan was not much of a law student. I really shouldn't say this, but he really wasn't much of a law student. And so he used to draw cartoons in the corner of my notebook. I still have that notebook, and the one that I will always brings a smile to my face is the day we were learning about crimes of moral turpitude. We talked about that this morning. Well, Juan cartooned turtles and kept calling them crimes of moral turtletude. And this went on, class after class. And what's interesting is I actually think he should have been a cartoonist. His grandfather was a renowned political cartoonist in Colombia. Juan was an incredible cartooner. So that was immigration law. Then moving to the next year, we took evidence together, which of course is one of the required courses. And somebody today remarked that the rules of evidence don't apply to immigration court, which is in part why it's kind of the Wild West of a court system. Well, I can tell you why they didn't apply under Juan's tenure. He didn't like evidence. And he didn't show up for class very frequently. So I would sit in the back of the room, and finally the professor, who was one of the toughest professors at AU, said one day, would somebody please tell Mr. Osuna to start showing up for class? And the entire class turned around and stared at me. So a few minutes later, and I know he did not know that had happened, I hear this psst, psst, and I look at the entrance to the room, and there's Juan with a picnic basket, and he's like, so I snuck out, and we had picnic on the campus together. Somehow we both survived law school, and he went on to become an incredible lawyer. I've never considered myself an incredible lawyer. I blame him for distracting me that whole time. But we both kind of fell in to the immigration field, I will say that. And thinking about his tenure in government, A few things. Well, first let me back up. Before he even joined the Justice Department, one of the greatest days in Juan's life was the day he was sworn in as a U.S. citizen. And I will never forget that day. He was very proud, and we were pretty certain we were going to get married. And I kept telling him, you know, we can get married, you can become a U.S. citizen. He didn't want to do it that way. He wanted to do it on his own terms. And there actually was a provision in IRCA that allowed children and spouses of international organization employees who had resided in the U.S. for a period of time to adjust to permanent residence. So that's how he became a permanent resident. So fast forwarding, when he was eligible for citizenship, he applied that on that day. This was one of his life goals. And going to the swearing in ceremony with him, I'll never forget that sea of faces reflecting the entirety of the world, the cacophony of languages, the little kids up to elderly women, and there was Juan in the middle clutching the little American flag they gave him, and tears coming down his face. And he often said the two happiest days in his life were the day we got married and the day he became a citizen. And he, because I think of his experience as an immigrant, he valued democratic ideals so deeply, and he valued a strong and accountable government to implement those ideals so strongly. So that when he found his place at the Department of Justice, it was perfect. It was perfect for him. Thinking about the time that he was on the Board of Immigration Appeals, Tara mentioned earlier the decision on material support. And just to share a little story that nobody else knows, he agonized on that one. He agonized because I think we all recognize the tremendous injustice of that provision in the law and how poorly it had been written, so broadly interpreted to apply to exactly the people that should not be excluded from the United States. So he kept coming home and talking about what do I do, because he also believed in the rule of law, and he did think that the majority wasn't off in that decision. So I said to him, I know nothing about how the board works other than what you tell me, but are you guys allowed to write a concurring opinion? And the light bulb went on, and he's like, oh, yeah. So that's how that came about. So I had a little bit of influence over him on those issues. But I also remember a day, it was around this time of the year, it was the week before Christmas, and I could tell something was really bothering him, and he wasn't talking about it. And finally, I kept saying, what's going on? And he shared with me that he had had an asylum case on appeal, a Coptic Christian, that the judge had denied, the immigration judge at the lower level had denied asylum to. Juan was struggling to find relief in that case and couldn't do it, so he finally upheld the immigration judge's decision. And he had found out that week that that man was deported on Christmas week back to his home country. And he broke down sobbing. And for Juan, the rule of law was also humanitarian, that the law only has meaning when it's applied to people with understanding and with compassion. And I know that decision continued to haunt him. So when he moved downtown, and I think those days of trying to push comprehensive immigration reform through working with you guys in the, not war room, were the highlight, really, of his DOJ career. He loved it, and I always thought that he would be good at policy, and he took to it like a fish to water. And I remember there was a picture on the front page of the New York Times where the big expose that there was a war room that the administration had set up on the Hill. And of course, in the photo on the front page of the New York Times was Esther Oliveria going into that room. Well, you can see a foot going through the door. That was Juan. And he's like, my foot's in the New York Times. But he just loved that whole experience. He had his frustrations at EOIR. There were so many things that he was trying to get over the finish line. And that last presentation at CMS, where Don was interviewing him on stage, was his last public presentation right after he had left government. And I only recently watched the video because it was just difficult. And I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to see his face, so I watched the video. But what struck me a few minutes into it was that was the essence of Juan. And that was also the essence of Don Kerwin, who asks very probing questions and gets people to open up. But I could see, just knowing how he reacted to things so intimately, that he was struggling, that there was more he wanted to say. And there was also he felt tremendous disappointment in himself, which was not fair, that the backlog had grown. He had a lot of concerns about how the child migration crisis in 2014 was handled. And boy, those were some interesting conversations between us. But Don, I think what you pulled from him was, again, the essence of Juan. He was measured. He always was measured. To go back to a funny story, during that summer crisis in 2014, the issue obviously was getting more and more visibility, very controversial. The administration was getting nervous, lots of things going on at the time. And his ethics counsel at DOJ advised him that you can't be in the room at the same time as your wife during this, knowing what I do. So I'm looking at Doris, because Doris hosted a lot of meetings where we would stage it, that I would be in the room from 9 to 1:45, Juan would come in right at the end of lunch, and then I would have to leave. I always thought it was a little silly, but understood it, and boy, did he stick to what his ethics counsel told him. But I always wondered what his ethics counsel would think if he heard the little whispered conversations we always had before one of us left the room, and it was usually, are you walking the dog tonight? Are you going to be home in time? Do we have anything to eat in the refrigerator? And of course, we had those conversations anyway at home. He was always very careful not to reveal anything that he wasn't supposed to, but we had some very deep conversations about what does this immigration system mean, and how do you influence it, being from government? How should we in the NGO community try to influence it? And I think we both agreed that when it works, it's when everybody comes together around the table. He did leave the morning after Jim Comey was fired. He knew Comey a little bit. For whatever reason, they sat next to each other in senior staff meetings under Eric Holder, and he liked him. He just genuinely liked him as a person, and he respected him. He, like many of us, had questions about how Comey had handled the 2016 election. But what it was about Comey being fired for Juan was how he was fired, and what he perceived as the lack of integrity, and the letting him know when he was on the West Coast in a room with his colleagues, and he came home to me, he said, that's it, I'm out. And it hurt. It hurt him. He did not, he wanted to finish what he had started. He did have a lovely 2 months, and I enjoyed those lovely 2 months with him when he was in between jobs. That last vacation hiking in British Columbia, we actually started the vacation in New York City to go to a concert called Big East Classic, which was 60s, 70s, and 80s bands. And I had bought him the tickets because his favorite band of all time was the Eagles. Loved Hotel California. He did not have a good singing voice, but I heard Hotel California over and over again in the car. And got the tickets because he'd never been able to hear them before. And I will never forget him beaming during that concert, belting out the words. So that was a high point. I had 30 years with him. And I feel very lucky that I was the one he looked across that law school room and chose. I thought I would have 30 more years. I don't. But I have all of you. And I know all of you are living his beliefs. You are digging in and digging deep to try and turn the ship around so that we can get back on track to build an immigration system that works for our country and that works for immigrants. Nothing would make him happier than to see us all do that together. So thank you all.